Let me just quickly say welcome to everyone. We're going to, as always, begin a minute or two late just to give people time to sign in. But if you see on your screen the notice of the Green Entrepreneurship Online Workshop Series, you know you're in the right spot. So we'll begin in just a minute or two. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome to the Green Entrepreneurship Online Workshop Series. And we'll give it another minute or so for people to log in and set their preferences, but we'll begin very shortly. And let me say once again, welcome to the third in the series of online workshops on green entrepreneurship. Today's topic is entrepreneurship and the Sustainable Development Goals. We're glad that you were able to join us from all over the world for today's session. My name is Brock Dickinson. I'm the entrepreneur in residence with the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. And I'll be introducing those who are leading today's session. If you are joining us for the first time, we'd like to remind you or let you know about the process for selecting which of our 3 languages you would like to hear today's presentation in. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see an interpretation icon. If you click on that icon, it will give you the choice of English, French, or Spanish. Select the language you would prefer to hear today's session in, and then click back into that icon and mute the original channel. And that will mean you'll hear that single language, the language of your preference throughout the session today. So the interpretation icon, then the language of your choice, and then mute the original audio. And once you've done that, you can settle in and we'll launch into the program today. As is our custom in Canada, I wanted to start by sharing what we call a land acknowledgement. We're being hosted today by the University of Waterloo, and the University of Waterloo is located on the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is also situated on the Haldimand Tract, which is the land that was promised to the Six Nations, land that includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. The workshop series that we're here as a part of is presented by the University of Waterloo, but we're very indebted to and grateful to our partners in this process, and in particular, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, which has provided all kinds of guidance and support as we've worked through developing these workshops, but is also giving us the simultaneous interpretation and the technology platform that we're working on today. So thank you very much to the CEC for that. We're also co-sponsored through this workshop series by the EcoInnovation Network, a coalition of post-secondary institutions across North America with an interest in green innovation. And you can see the founding members of this network displayed there on the screen: universities from Canada, from the United States, and from Mexico. And we certainly appreciate all of the support of those universities as we work through this series as well. Today, we're going to be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. And chances are that most of you are familiar with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. But for those few who might be hearing about these for the first time, let me just say that this is a collection of 17 international environment and development goals that have been adopted by the entire international community. Between the years 2015 and 2030, we have set out a series of very specific targets that we will achieve in working towards environment and development solutions. And as we look at some of these individual goals, we start to understand how they connect to ideas like entrepreneurship. Some of the goals are very economic in their nature: the elimination of poverty, good jobs and economic growth. But for other goals, as we think about things like clean energy or clean water or climate action, part of our success will rest on our ability to bring new tools to communities and to individuals around the world. And in some instances, entrepreneurial approaches might be the best way to bring those tools to those communities and those individuals. And so today we want to explore how those ideas connect together. What is the link between entrepreneurship and the SDGs? Now, the Sustainable Development Goals are being worked on by many organizations around the world, but today I particularly want to thank an organization known as the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. This is an international structure that was started by the United Nations and key academics that's meant to mobilize research institutions around the world to support activity towards the goals. And we're very pleased today that in putting together today's program, we've been able to reach out to the SDSN chapters in Mexico, in Canada, and in the United States to help us develop the program for today. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to our MC for today's session. It's my pleasure to introduce Needu Jagoda, who is currently pursuing a Master's of Climate Change at the University of Waterloo. Her research interests lie in climate change and emerging technologies, in innovation and science literacy, and in climate change diplomacy and partnership development. She's previously worked as a junior hydrogeologist, a geochemical laboratory assistant, and an operations and outreach assistant, but is currently the network coordinator for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Canada Youth Chapter. Needu, welcome.
Thank you, Brock, for that warm welcome. And as Brock said, I will be your MC for today, so I'm excited for that. Today's panel will be there will be 3 panelists presenting on today's topic. There is an open Q&A session where you can use the Q&A function embedded in Zoom to pose questions directly to the panelists. I will do my best to select a few representative questions and bring them up at the end of the session. So we're going to invite each panelist to speak for about 15 minutes on the topic of entrepreneurship and the SDGs. I'll introduce each speaker before they go. And as a note, please think about the questions you may have for them once you're done. Please type them and put them in the Q&A function. So without further ado, let's get started. So welcome to the 3rd session in a series of 6 workshops on the topic of green entrepreneurship. This was developed by the University of Waterloo Entrepreneurship at Environment Office with the support from the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, so the CEC, and the EcoInnovation Network. This was designed for youth, students, and entrepreneurs from across Canada, the United States, and Mexico. However, we do have more than 620 participants who have signed up from more than 38 countries in this series. In addition to great participation from the 3 CEC members, the largest group participants so far have been from the United Kingdom, Turkey, Colombia, Brazil, Ghana, and Nigeria. And again, just a reminder, this session is being translated simultaneously into English, French, and Spanish. So all you have to do to listen in the language of your choice is to connect to the audio channel in your preferred language. And without further ado, let me introduce our first guest, Charles Beaudry. Charles Beaudry is the mobilizer of Accelerate 2030 for Quebec, a consortium of citizens and organizations committed to the vision of the 17 SDG goals to guide Quebec's prosperity by 2030. It is through his role as co-founder and CEO of Impact Hub in Montreal that Accelerating 2030 for Quebec took shape. Through a major process of mobilization and consultation of organizations from each sector of activity in different regions of Quebec. He has interests in sustainable and inclusive development, as well as the development of human relations and partnership. He has been involved in the field of social entrepreneurship and sustainable development since 2016 and understands the needs of the sector and devotes himself entirely to bringing new avenues of creative thinking based on proven international practices and existing networks. He joins us today from Quebec. Charles?
Yes, hi Needu. Do you hear me? Parfait.
So now I'm going to speak in French, so that you have a few seconds to switch channel. Is it working? Yeah? If I now speak French, is the interpretation available?
Yes, it is, Charles. Thank you.
So I can keep on talking in French. So looks like everything is working. So thank you very much for your invitation. Thanks, Brooke, for introducing me. It's my great pleasure to join this panel, and it's a great pleasure for me to be able to speak in French. I'm used to I'm not so used to have an interpretation available, so for me it's a great pleasure to be able to speak in French. I'm going to share my screen to show you my presentation, and once it's done, I'm going to begin. So I hope that everyone can see my presentation correctly. If someone can confirm through the chat that it's working. So my name is Charles Beaudry. I'm a mobilizator for Accelerate Quebec 2030. Accelerate 2030 is a group of different organizations, a federation of organizations. It's a social enterprise, so I consider myself as a kind of SDGs entrepreneur. SDGs for Sustainable Development Goal. The SDGs, it's a kind of a new word in Quebec and in Canada, so I'm going to explain you what my company is doing, and talk also about my my journey as an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. So SDG entrepreneur, as I said, something that's very important now in this crisis context is to highlight the resilience of the social entrepreneurs, the impact entrepreneurs, since we're experiencing a lot of uncertainties for the private sector, for the companies. So in some countries, they talk about the social enterprise or impact entrepreneur. And in my old wording, I'm talking about the SDGs entrepreneur. But the common point is that we are all interested by social, environmental, and economic issues, and that also consider those issues on the long term. So those different topics are interconnected. So if we're talking about social or impact entrepreneurs, we're talking about more or less the same thing. So Accelerate 2030 is a federation, a kind of federation of organizations that share a common vision. And in my case, as a social entrepreneur, my goal is to gather organization all through Quebec. Quebec is a region of Canada, an administrative region of Canada. So we are trying to identify networks in order to work together to reach the SDGs. So I'm working as a mobilizer for this network, for this federation of networks. So Brooke already mentioned the 17 SDGs. I would just like to add one important thing, is the notion of interconnection. Each of those 70 goals are interconnected. If we consider those 70 SDGs as an entrepreneur or as a public servant or an academic, we need to consider that an impact on one of those SDG will also have an impact in a great number of others, other SDGs. So within Accelerate 2030, we are trying to federate organizations from all sectors. So my goal is the goal 70, so partnerships for the goals, strengthen the means of implementation, and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. I'm going to explain a bit further about this SDG 17, but first I would like to contextualize a little bit what I've been saying concerning the interconnection of those 70s SDGs. So one example, the example of the current COVID-19 pandemic, a pandemic that have had an impact, a direct impact on every one of us. So if we consider the impact of this pandemic, it's first of all a health crisis. So if we're talking about health, we're talking about the SDG number 3, good health and well-being. So it would be about trying to improve the health condition of the world population. So what we've been seeing since the last few months is that the consequences, the impact of this pandemic for the population is related with some social stakes important. For example, the women or the youth are harder hit by this crisis. Or if we're talking about the consequences for the startup or the SMEs, so we can consider the SDG number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. We need strong institutions to tackle such a huge crisis like this one. So that's what we can see is that this SDG framework is a way to consider our social impact on the global level. So I'm going to repeat myself, but using a common language is what allows us as an entrepreneur or to work together to reach common goals, measurable and comparable goals. So in all the countries, we all have these same frameworks, SDG framework, but the way we are trying to implement this framework can be different from one country to another. So one opportunity for my company and what I'm going to present you now is that this framework is not a well-known framework. For example, here in Canada, only 4% of the population of the Canadian population knew about those SDGs. So if 5 years after the adoption of this agenda, there's still only 4% of the Canadian population that know about this agenda and know what it's all about and why such a framework has been adopted. So these statistics show the role that the entrepreneur could play in order to accelerate those SDGs in Quebec, in Canada, and in the rest of the world. So what we can see here is a kind of graphic that represents Canada, and we could do the same for any country, putting a symbol of Mexico or of the US in the middle. But what this graphic says that in order to reach those SDGs, we need to leave no one behind. So we need strategies that will allow us to integrate the strategies of the different stakeholders, what I call the SDGs ecosystem. So we're talking about the youth, the academic sector, the civil society, and this graphic, we took it from a document from the Canadian government, the national strategy, Canadian SDGs strategy. And one element is lacking in this graphic is the entrepreneurs. Now that a lot of changes are needed, I think that the importance of the entrepreneurs is bigger than ever. So as I said, I consider myself an SDG entrepreneur. So what do we do on that matter? So we've been trying to create a real SDGs ecosystem. So we are trying to implement on the field, those SDGs on the field, and we're focusing on a specific SDG, the 17, that's a partnership for the goals in order to strengthen the connection between the public and private sector and the academic sector and the civil society to reach those goals in 2030. So we are trying to work on the whole Quebec region to help implement those goals, and specifically this SDG number 17. So we have like 4 pillars of our action. I'm going to focus on one of them. So since 2016, we're trying to mobilize the population on the whole Quebec region to make like to have an idea of the situation about the SDGs in our region. And what we realize is that not much have been done yet, and not many people are trying to align their action with the SDGs agenda. So we're trying to engage the entrepreneurs for the SDGs. And to do so, we've launched an ambitious plan of action. So trying to help the entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, to get the proper fundings first. Second pillar, we're trying to help the access to some tools in favor of the SDGs, and also trying to do advocacy in favor of the SDGs for the whole population. So as I said, we're trying to implement the SDGs in the field, and for us, it's the entrepreneurs have a key role to play in Quebec, in Canada, and in the rest of the world. I'm looking forward to hear the rest of my colleagues today about this topic. So what we can see here is an SDG entrepreneur. It can be me or someone else, and that show the kind of thing we could do about each of the SDGs, and the connection with the COVID-19 pandemic. So these graphics show where the entrepreneurship could have an impact on the community level to help reduce poverty among the most vulnerable communities. So for me, there's not one only SDG that identify what an entrepreneur should do. I think that the whole 70s SDGs could be related with the entrepreneur activities. So our call to action, my call to action, would be to say that the current pandemic should be a call to action here in Canada, in the United States, in Mexico, so that we can work together using a common language to reach the SDGs. My advices now, my tips for the new entrepreneurs that are listening to this workshop. If you're just launching a company, or if you're just beginning to consider how to include the SDGs in your activities, I think that there's like 3 ways to easily begin. First, if there's some topic, some issue you're trying to tackle, that's the first step. Second step would be to try to identify what you're currently doing could have an impact on one or different SDGs, and trying to integrate those SDGs in your company activities. This SDGs framework is a flexible one. It's not And third step, a little bit like what we are doing in Accelerate 2030, you can try to mobilize a full community in favor of one SDG, like we've been doing with the 17. And that will help you to measure your impact on one or different SDGs. I have been talking a lot. I don't know if I still have some time left. I would like just to share one concrete example of one initiative we're launching recently, and that include our different priorities in the Quebec context. So the impact entrepreneurs have been hit hard by the current pandemic. That's one thing. And on the other side, as I said, only 4% of the Canadian population know about the SDGs. So we've been launching an advocacy campaign about the SDGs here in Quebec in order to identify 100 women entrepreneurs, SDG number 5, gender equality, in order to help them to reach one of the 17 SDGs. So through that way, we've been trying to highlight the importance to connect the activities of one company with one or several SDGs. So you can check what we've been doing. There's 100 different projects we're trying to help in order to create more partnerships. So I'll conclude with a quote that I like a lot by Albert Einstein. So definition of being insane is doing the same once each time the same thing and expecting to get different results. So what I'd like to invite you to do today is to consider this SDGs framework, since it's a great way to generate more connection and a way to better work together. Thanks for your attention, and I give back the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I'm just going to give a minute for a translation team to get everything together. Thank you for that very insightful presentation. And just a reminder to the audience, there is an open Q&A function in the chat, so please make sure to put all your questions in for the panelists. Now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Raul Hernandez. Raul is a mechatronics engineer invested in consolidating sustainable development in Mexico and the world. He's invested in promoting a world where nature and technology work together to improve the world for every living being. As Director of Projects and Partnership for SDSN in Mexico, his work is centered in promoting solutions backed by academia and fostered in co-creation environments. He has presented projects at the Student Energy Summit in Merida in 2017 and at the International Congress for Sustainable Development in 2019. In SDSN Mexico, he co-sponsored the innovation platform called the Project Bank and has designed their latest initiative, SDG Experts. He joins us today from Mexico City. Hello, Raul.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I will corroborate what I'm going to present, and tell me if you can see the presentation. Can you see it now? Okay. Thank you very much for the time. Like you said, my name is Raul Hernandez. I'm leader for projects and partnerships, and we'll be talking about entrepreneurship and the sustainable development goals. The agenda is the following. First, I'm going to present SDSN. this is in Mexico specifically. I'm going to present these solutions created in the academia, and we will talk about entrepreneurship and sustainable development and case studies for Mexico. As it was already mentioned, I'm going to try to mobilize sustainable development in everything that is developed in academia in order to consolidate in the universities, in the cities, in a regional manner. Specifically, we are working with 75 member universities. We work with the government. We work with our counterparts, the private sector, and we also involve the society with the support of sponsors. So our current initiatives are three. We have the Banco de Proyectos. This is a platform that allows us to present not only initiatives that has different locations along Mexico, but also they either donate time or monetary donations, and they can help consolidate at least a goal or initiative. In fact, we have an open visitation, and in this way, this initiative is to have better in sustainable development, and it allows to generate a network with these experts, and also it helps to present in a better way all the work that they're doing. And we have an initiative with youth, and this initiative is we try to have a very simple course, and people who are interested in generating impact in their communities and have the tools to start a project from zero. And that project can coincide always with once that I presented the initiatives, it's worthwhile to see how we can include the understanding, the empowerment with sustainable development. Some of the slides are in English, and not to have any problems. I apologize. You're hitting on the microphone, so it's making a lot of noise. And to speak a little bit slower. Thank you very much. I apologize because I'm too emotional. So like I told you, sustainable development goes together with empowerment. But if we want to make a perfect match, it's through innovation. We currently have an idea, a vision, which is called a transformative innovation. And what this is doing is to do an interaction with innovation, but it tries to include greater environments so that the work that is being developed, it doesn't only coincide with a person who is a consumer, but it also supports the different environments. It has 6 major axles: directionality, social objective, impact at a system level, learning and reflexivity, conflict against consensus, and inclusivity. And not only to, it also supports the society. How is this related to sustainable development? It's very easy. All of us want to transform our world, and we need context. And this is constitutions, alliances work. And this is the way in which we can have environments, transversal environments with social objectives and more constant on a daily basis. And we can work in socio-technical systems in specific areas, but we need to have this available, we can develop the in sustainable development. You need everybody to consolidate. Objective 17 is alliances to accomplish the objectives. There's a way of doing a very simple thing. If we want to go to a specific relationship between empowerment and sustainable development, we need to see what is the impact that they have had in the GDP. For example, it could be armed conflict and violence. It could be an impact on biodiversity and ecosystems. It could be the impact on health. These different environments that affect society, it also affects the way in doing business. And as you can see, we relate this with people. As you can also see, this is to start sustainable development. It provides very good profits, and it could have a return of millions of dollars or billions of dollars in other environments you can see, like energy, like better housing, like health. As you can see, there's a broad fan that you can see. Then we can also invest in, there's a MIT report that says that investing in mangroves can have a profit which is triple. If you invest 2 million, you can receive a profit of $7 million. I apologize, but it's you're making a lot of noise in the microphone. I think it's my shirt. The interpreters are sending messages that we can't hear very well. I apologize. Okay, so going specifically in how to start with sustainable development. Thank you to the Spanish network. Solutions for Sustainable Development gives us a guide for, and this is something very easy to work with. Gives us opportunities like access to new markets, savings in costs, contracts with the public sector, to improve the reputation and to improve also trust in a trademark. And this mentions specifically sustainable development. How can we do this? Very simply. First, we have to know these sustainable development objectives. We have to define priorities and what is the specific objective. We need to establish the objectives to reach that objective and work on that. And we need to integrate them not only in our person when we carry out our activities, our work activities, but at the moment that we are with the family or with our friends. And something very important, to report the work that we are developing. Now, this agrees, and these coincide with our empowerment and the development of sustainable development. These can coincide. Now you can go into our website and look at it. This reports, this has reports by country, and it also publish reports internally in each country. As you can see in each one of the boxes that are green, that means that we will reach this objective by 2030. The ones in red says that we need to do more work to consolidate. And we also had the trends that tells us which are the ones that could be in green and which ones would not. In USD 12, we don't have the information to consolidate this objective. If entrepreneur is watching this, maybe they can coincide with this. This country is Canada. Now we go to the next slide. for another country. And as you can see in this country, there are several conflicts in OECD 15. They're lowering the expectations in order to reach sustainable development. This country is the United States, and we can see that there are many objectives of sustainable development that coincide negative or positive way in depending on the work that we as entrepreneurs will carry out. Finally, we reached my country here in Mexico, and you can see that we need several steps in order to reach the objectives of sustainable development. But there are several trends that are towards increase, but we don't have a way of accounting in a feasible way objective 12, which is the responsible use. In this way, if somebody has a company that generates methodology, this is an incredible space. And these are just ideas. And these are all the objectives of sustainable development need empowerment and need the assistance of the academia and social and the social community. These are the studies, the case studies in Mexico. This is a company that cooks pizzas. Instead of using the pizza base, they use a tortilla, they use also beans, and they also add grasshoppers. So this is a very good dish in Mexico. This pizza company gives work to people on the street, and if you buy pizza, it gives great value. Another case is someone somewhere. This is the name of the company. It's Mexican, and someone is the person that developed the clothing, and the somewhere is where they make this this dress or this clothing. She developed this clothing in Naupan, Puebla. 88% are women, and they also help to reduce, they help with the gender equity, and they work with craftsmen. In Mexico, the women are the ones that are marginalized. And lastly, we have, they receive more water because of rain than even the UK. So there are a lot of flooding. So this company decided to say that everybody needs a roof, and it filters the water, and it filters rainwater, and they can have water from 6 to 8 months a year because of the water that they filter. They have devices in marginal areas, and Mexico City invested on them so that they can use, so they can have work and apply their knowledge in the area, which is called Ixtapalapa, and they have problems with the scarcity of rainwater. I would like to give you some advice. The first advice is that any problem is a solution directly. We can have a solution for any problem, but we have to know how to present it, and also now know many times we have the knowledge, but when you see a new product, a solution, and you might say, oh, why didn't I think of that? So if you have a problem, always think of how you can solve it. And there is the entrepreneurship. Second, you always have to be knowing. You always have to be in constant knowledge and understanding new things, because this way you can see different alliances, different challenges. If you take this challenge just because of probabilities, you can find a solution. You can work many years, and it turns out that you could do it another way, but you had to expand your knowledge in order to know how to change the way in which you solve a problem. And I was saying in other presentation, we have to fall in love with the problems, not so much in the solutions that we will develop. And finally, I would like, we have to prepare and don't shy away from the hard work. Things are not solved overnight, and the work speaks for itself. We can't constantly be waiting for things to fall from the sky. We had to dedicate time and effort. And finally, I would like to finish with a phrase from Isaac Newton, and he wrote it in 1695 that says, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And the knowledge is not developed by oneself. You have to work with others. And it makes a reference to the work that we have developed, not only as persons, but of humanity with this collective knowledge. Thank you, and that's all I have. That is my email if you would like to get in touch with me or to make any comments.
Thank you, Rahul, for that insightful presentation. And now we are running a bit late, so I'd like to introduce Grace Rodriguez. And so Grace is the co-founder and CEO of Impact Houston, a locally rooted, globally connected nonprofit organization that provides inclusive platforms, international programs, and resources to empower change makers and help social entrepreneurs to create sustainable solutions with scalable impact. Impact Hub has been recognized by the United Nations as the world's largest network for accelerating entrepreneurial solutions forward and towards measurable impact for the Sustainable Development Goals. Grace has real-world experience in design thinking, system strategy, and facilitating transformational change, which she puts to work supporting Greater Houston diverse communities. She's also a startup mentor through accelerator programs like Mass Challenge, Lily, Red Labs, and Capital Factory, and is the lead organizer for Women in Tech, for example, Houston WIT and TEDx Houston. She joins us today from Texas. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about entrepreneurship and the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to make sure that you are seeing the presentation. Okay, thank you. And I'm so appreciative of Raul and Charles going earlier and talking from the perspective of an ecosystem and systemic collaboration for entrepreneurship and the Sustainable Development Goals. My talk will be a little bit more practical, and we'll explore how you can create an impact enterprise today to solve the problems of tomorrow. And I'll weave in the SDGs throughout the narrative. So you heard a little bit about Impact Hub Houston. We're a nonprofit organization that provides intentional programs, inclusive communities, and an international network to empower change makers and help them create scalable impact for the SDGs. I'm really excited to join this session because we really want to help more change makers like you become effective impact entrepreneurs who go on to lead successful ventures. What we'll cover is what impact entrepreneurship is, help you identify your purpose, create a theory of change, and plan for sustainability and scalability. And you might be asking yourself, how can you create your own impact enterprise to build a better future? Some people start businesses because they see an opportunity in a market that they want to capitalize on. Some want to be their own bosses, some want to improve their quality of life. But impact entrepreneurs start their ventures because they're passionate about creating positive impact in the world. As Raul said earlier, fall in love with a problem. So change makers, these impact entrepreneurs, fall in love with a problem and want to make it their life's work versus something they just volunteer a few hours a week to help solve. And to give you an understanding of how we define impact entrepreneurship, it's simply exercising your problem-solving capacity for the betterment of society. So it's not complicated. It's really, if you want to solve problems, you are entrepreneurial. You might want to solve that problem for your community or for a population that you care about that might be disadvantaged. You might want to solve it for the environment or for your city or country, or for a global or universal issue, which is what the SDGs are related to. In the US, impact ventures have been referred to as triple bottom line businesses, so ones that equally care about people, planet, and profit. Many corporations now refer to this as ESG, and that's considered a business approach that also thinks about its environmental, social, and governance strategies. But regardless of whatever you call it, impact enterprises all prioritize positive impact and intentionally optimize the business and revenue models to create that impact. We use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as directional guides for impact innovation, and we support entrepreneurs working on solutions in any of these areas. But for us as an organization, for Impact Hub Houston, we look at the kind of impact that we create for our community through the lens of these 6 specific sustainable development goals. And it's generally reducing inequality, improving gender equality, providing decent work and economic growth, supporting innovation and infrastructure, especially among disadvantaged communities and minority populations, and then developing more sustainable cities and communities so that we can address environmental justice and other disparities within our community. And finally, the partnerships for the goals. We want to make sure that we're working with a number of different types of organizations, both public sector and private sector, to create the impact that we want to see at scale. And then these terms that are on the slide are our values. So in general, when you're thinking about whether a venture is an impact venture and what you're launching is an impact enterprise, you just ask yourself, does it prioritize impact? Does it have an ability to change people's lives or improve the world that isn't just a side effect, but is really a core part of what you do, why you do it, and how you do it? Does it actually create impact? Are the outputs and outcomes that are created by the venture demonstrating progress towards one of the SDGs? And then if you look up the Sustainable Development Goals, they actually have these more specific targets that you can also use as guidelines on how you want to create impact. And then finally, does it use responsible business practices? Whether you decide on going for a for-profit or a nonprofit model, an impact enterprise should strive for financial sustainability and growth so that you can continue to do the work and hopefully scale and grow that work. Which brings us to those business models. Some people think that if you want to do good, you should start a nonprofit organization, at least in the US. But there are many different models for financial sustainability that you can consider for your own structure. One is, the obvious nonprofit, which is a tax-exempt non-business entity that invests excess funds back into the mission. So rather than saving profits or creating profits, it reinvests that back into the mission. There are cooperatives, which are businesses organized by and for the members. So a credit union or a community grocery store are some examples of co-ops. An impact firm employs those in the community who need jobs. Fair Start, which is F-A-R-E, Start, is a good example. It employs at-risk youth and serves healthful meals. So that's an example of how you do, what kind of practices you implement for your business can also determine that social impact, even though the outcome, what they're actually delivering, what kind of products and services might not look like social impact. There's also impact responsible business. These types of companies support impact missions as a part of their day-to-day business operations. And obviously for-profit businesses, which are profit first, but they can donate funds or raise awareness or support causes. For instance, Warby Parker's Buy a Pair, Give a Pair program is an example of that. And then one new entity, relatively newish entity that you might hear a lot about is B corporations, which employs a private certification process for for-profit companies. And those certifications are provided by B Lab, which is a global nonprofit organization. And you have to receive a minimum score in an assessment to determine your impact and environmental performance. And you have to recertify every 3 years to make sure that you maintain that B Corporation status. But if you go through the process of getting B Corporation status, then it's an easy indicator for other communities and for potential investors and potential customers to say that you are socially minded and that you commit to that. So when you're in the early stages of starting an impact enterprise, you have 2 immediate tasks. find a problem you care about, that problem you want to fall in love with, which would be your purpose, and then seek to understand the problem deeply, both from the perspective of the individuals that you want to serve who are encountering this problem every single day, and then from the ecosystem level. And by ecosystem, I mean the community, your collaborators, even your competitors, your local government, all of the people who have a stake in the impact that you're going to create. And sometimes identifying and understanding a problem can occur at the same time as you're working to solve that problem. So as an example, we started Impact Hub Houston because there was no organization in Houston that was specifically dedicated to bridging the tech startup and the small business communities together, and then inclusively and equitably helping people who want to change the world through innovation and entrepreneurship. So what is your purpose? If you already have a purpose in mind, that's great. And you can get straight to work establishing your organization and building your venture. But if not, and you're stuck, or if you want to learn more about the problem that you want to solve before deciding whether it's something you want to pursue full time, some ways you can jumpstart ideas are, by thinking about who do you think needs help but isn't getting it. So looking back at the SDGs, when you think about gender equality or reducing inequalities, which populations are experiencing disparities, are not being served equitably, and then how can you help them? And you can interview people who are experiencing different problems. You can go into the communities yourself and see what people are experiencing as you fully immerse yourself in the community. You can also think about what impact issues do you personally care deeply about? And so if you are already volunteering with organizations, you can identify which ones do you find make you feel like more passionate and connected with an issue. You can also, if you're not volunteering with organizations, that is one way to learn which kind of impact issues you care most about. So an example of that is if you're thinking about quality education, there are so many different levels and different types of communities and solutions to improve quality education. So you can volunteer with an organization that improves digital literacy, helps young youth learn about tech. You can also think about how do you educate people who are in rural areas who don't have access to the internet. There are so many different ways of addressing the SDG of quality education. You can also ask, where are there gaps that need to be filled? So if you look at your ecosystem, and as Charles and Raul demonstrated, there are a lot of different organizations, and not all of them are addressing maybe maybe there are some gaps that aren't being addressed. So you can look at which populations are not being served, which organizations are trying to serve the same population and, kind of being left behind. So then you can figure out who do you really want to help. When have you needed something, but you couldn't get it, or no solution existed for it? And that's one important aspect of impact entrepreneurship, is that people who are closest to the problem tend to be the ones who are really passionate about solving it. So if there's something that has frustrated you on a daily basis, let's say if getting from home to work, or right now with the pandemic, how do you work and or bring people together when there is this threat of disease around? Solving that problem for yourself means you can potentially solve that problem for other people. And then you can also think about, how have others failed due to lacking some kind of experience or expertise that you have? One of the things that we have as a benefit for Impact Hub Houston, some other organizations that try to do the similar, providing, convening, catalyzing our ecosystem, and then providing equitable entrepreneurship support to our community. Some of the reasons why other organizations weren't able to thrive by doing that was because they didn't have access to the same kind of mentors and network that we were able to build. So if you think about what other organizations might be failing at that you might be doing better at, that's another way of figuring out what your purpose is. And then you can think about, creating your theory of change, and that needs to happen for your desired impact to be achieved. Really thinking about how you can identify areas that require further review and determine what data to collect over time to validate whether your theory holds. So when you're creating that, you can ask yourself, whom do you want to benefit? And what kind of benefits do you want to achieve? When will you want to achieve them? How will you and other people make that impact happen. So what kind of activities, what kind of strategies, what kind of resources will you need to be able to make that impact happen? Where and under what circumstances will you do your work? So you can also think about different types of regions. The greater Houston area where we operate is over 26,000 square kilometers. And we obviously, we can't reach everybody across our entire city and in all these different neighborhoods. So we want to make sure that we are much more specific in targeting people who really need the kind of support that we want to provide. And then thinking really deeply about, why do you believe your theory of change will bear out? Like, what kind of assumptions do you have? What kind of assumptions have you made? Talking to a lot of different people within the environment or the ecosystem or community that you want to serve will help you understand what the real issues and the real challenges are, and so that you can better address those challenges. So for instance, in one area of Houston, we found that there was a grocery store that was being closed, and people thought, well, there's not a grocery store that's really needed in that neighborhood, because there was another grocery store within a couple kilometers of it. What they didn't realize, though, was that the people who lived in that neighborhood would walk to that grocery store, and the grocery store would allow them to use the carts and to bring their groceries home, because a lot of people in that neighborhood didn't have public transportation or didn't have their own cars to be able to, ferry their groceries back and forth. So by looking at the neighborhood, looking at what those the people in the neighborhood were experiencing, you could see that the problem wasn't just having this grocery store or this resource for them. It was really that their inability to access one that was farther away. So at Impact Up Houston, we look at three primary indicators of the impact that we want to achieve, and that is member growth, because if we have more members, that means we're delivering good value to attract and keep diverse impact entrepreneurs and impact innovators. We look at organizational growth. So are we improving our internal operations and our revenue model so that we're hiring more people and delivering more impactful programs? And then we also look at ecosystem growth. So, like the previous speakers, we are also looking at how do we collaborate effectively with other organizations to reach and help more people. And then also, there are some organizations that focus on supporting people who would qualify more in the US as like small businesses. So let's say somebody owns a grocery store, a local grocery store, or owns a restaurant or has a catering business, might not have the same kind of programs in terms of technology skills, awareness of different platforms that those entrepreneurs could be using to help them automate some aspects of their business, so they didn't have to spend all day doing accounting and that kind of thing. So are there organizations that we could collaborate with? Again, SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals. How can we collaborate with them to help strengthen their programs so that the impact that they're creating is going to help their constituents be more resilient for a future of automation? And then as you establish your business and your company, you can also think about, how do you plan for sustainability? Because impact enterprises prioritize impact, but they also must strive for financial sustainability, right? So while you may rely on philanthropic capital to get started, as if you're a nonprofit, you might rely on grants, but to get your work off the ground, ultimately, you have to have a model that enables you to stay afloat without a constant infusion of charitable dollars. So earned revenue is important even for a nonprofit organization. And that kind of revenue is a key factor that differentiates an impact enterprise from a typical nonprofit organization or an NGO. So early on in your impact entrepreneurship journey, you have to determine the kind of revenue engine that can effectively fuel your growth and make sure that you're sustainable, and that you can also be scalable. I'll share with you some different revenue engines for impact enterprises, but just consider these as a starting point. You must determine what business models work best for your particular problem and your particular solution in your specific market, because some of these won't apply to wherever you are in the world all the time. So revenue engine, there are several terms that get tossed around interchangeably, but all serve distinct roles in helping your business achieve financial sustainability. One is the business model, which takes into account your finances, customer acquisition, revenue streams, all of these processes that your business has. And then there's revenue model, which is a subsection of the business model. And it's an overall plan for how your different revenue streams fit together. So if you're selling products and selling services and then getting corporate sponsorships, those are different revenue streams. And so, yeah, a single source of revenue for your business is a revenue stream. Okay, I take a breath. Okay, and then planning for sustainability. Here are some examples of different models for financial sustainability. One is earned income, or traditionally thought of as sales or a fee for service. And these types of impact enterprises for this revenue stream, they package their products or services and sell them either to beneficiaries or to an organization that is willing to pay for them. So how they develop this model is generally these enterprises identify a market need that is not being met, and then they develop a corresponding service or product that people are willing to pay for. And yeah, so an example is one of our members is Just Add Beats, and it's an educational program that provides critical thinking and 21st century skills for students, anywhere from elementary school to university. And what they do is they teach young people how to develop their own music, to be like audio engineers, sound engineers, create podcasts through having the students form agencies, like their internal teams. And then what they realized was that for US or our local schools here, they needed more STEAM programming. So that's STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, with the injection of arts to make it STEAM. And so a lot of our schools needed more STEAM programming to keep students engaged and to help them get familiar and comfortable with different types of technology. And Just Add Beats developed this program, and they found that they could sell to Harris County, which is our local government that is supporting a lot of different school districts. And then Just Add Beats could go into the schools and then deliver that service, that educational service. Another model is franchising, micro-franchising, or business in a box. And these types of impact enterprises license members of a local community to run kind of a business in a box or a micro-franchise. And that typically, the founder, the entrepreneur, typically coordinates overhead or central office functions so that it can create efficiencies at scale while providing local people with an opportunity to create generational wealth. And they provide local people with capital and inventory to get their business off the ground. And the way these types of micro franchises make money is by receiving a percentage of the franchisees or the local entrepreneurs' sales in order to fund their own costs. Example of this is Mwinda Technologies. So this is also a member of the Impact Hub Houston community. And what they do is provide solar energy products and generators and batteries to communities in Africa, so that the people who, the families that are getting these solar energy fueled generators are able to power their own homes, but then also able to sell charging people's electronic devices and other devices to other people in the community. And so that family that gets one of the Mwinda Technologies solar panels is actually literally running a business in a box as a micro franchise of Mwinda. Another model is cross-subsidization. And this is where the revenue that's generated from some customers are used to subsidize the goods or services provided to other customers. And Impact Hub Houston is an example of that. We have corporate sponsors who pay us for consulting and pay us to deliver programs and events. And that helps us to subsidize delivering entrepreneurial support to diverse entrepreneurs who are unable to afford membership. There's also market linkage, and these types of impact enterprises work to connect entrepreneurs to markets. And market linkage could take the form of buying a product from a local craftsman at local market prices and then selling it to an international market at an increased price so that they can get that profit margin, while the local craftsman can get their own profit margin, set their own profit margin. The impact enterprise could also provide a value-added service to local entrepreneurs, such as helping them with marketing or technical assistance or financing, and then connect them to these expanded, markets that might be outside of their geography. An example of that is Sangar Rum, who is also one of our members. It's founded by a person who has family in Liberia and has connections with agricultural communities there, and decided to provide entrepreneurial education and support for the farmers in Liberia so that they could provide sugar cane for the rum, and then selling the rum here in the US. Another form of impact entrepreneurship is microphilanthropy, which is an emergent model of impact enterprise. And you can think about this as like crowdfunding. It also involves the donation of money, goods, or services to people in need. And so one example of this is PPE for the people. So one of the things that Impact Hub Houston did during the pandemic was work with a 3D printing company called Re3D. And we started this campaign to raise funding, to crowdsource funding to provide personal protective equipment, or PPE, to people in underserved and minority communities, because the data was showing that the majority of people who were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, had higher rates of being infected, had higher rates of being hospitalized, were in minority communities, or specifically Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino communities in Houston. And so we wanted to make sure that the businesses and the workers in those communities were getting personal protective equipment as well. So we launched a fund to raise funding for that, gave money to Re3D to create the protective equipment, and then made sure that we also had organizations that were reaching out to us to deliver that equipment to those communities. And then finally, employment generation. So this model of impact enterprise creates job opportunities for a target population, such as refugees, women, youth, or people with disabilities. And that would include for Spectrum Fusion, people who are neurodiverse. So you would have people who are on the autism spectrum who have a lot of talent, but we're finding it difficult to get employed within the market because a lot of business owners didn't understand how to support them. And so Spectrum Fusion started teaching different businesses how to start integrating people on the spectrum into their workforce, and then helped prepare people who are on the autism spectrum how to be able to integrate well, from their end into the workforce, and also how to provide their skills on an open market. So you have freelance videographers and freelance code developers or web developers that Spectrum Fusion is helping find clients for. And then just to wrap up quickly, so, planning for scalability, you want to make sure that you can continue to scale your impact, because if we are to reach the 2030 goals, you need to make sure that we're addressing as many, different communities as possible. You can think about how do you make sure that you can open source your plans, maybe so other people can learn from what you're doing and then be able to replicate that in their markets. Can you work with different governments or corporations, multinational corporations, to help scale what you're doing to other markets? And then, yeah, and that's it.
Thank you, Grace. And thank you to all our presenters. You guys have made wonderful presentations and very insightful ones as well. And now we will move on to the Q&A section. So our chat has been fed with quite a few questions. Thank you to our translation team for translating them, and the audience for participating. I guess I'll just start. So it talks a bit about how you guys mentioned a bit about the SDGs and how to move them on a global or with your initiatives. And if you could add to anything on this conversation, what do you think is still missing in terms of work that needs to be done on a global level? And this is a question to all three panelists. If anyone wants to take the question.
I can give it a shot, Nidu. And I really like the last presentation from Grace from a really practical standpoint, because for me, what's missing is the bridge to build between kind of the systemic infrastructure and then the practical work that needs to be done on the ground. So operationalizing the SDGs through entrepreneurship, through new projects. So I found it sometimes really difficult to build that bridge between the people who have the solutions to achieve the SDGs and then the systemic environment who has invisible barriers to overcome, basically. That being said, I think it's still possible, and I think it's the point of this discussion today, is that the social or the impact entrepreneurs, as Grace called them, can be the solution for that change.
I agree. I think for us to be able to reach the 2030 goals, we'll really need more investment. So the same way that we saw the rise of, Silicon Valley and all of these tech startups, we need just as much investment in impact entrepreneurs and impact enterprises for them to have that kind of same scalable reach and impact that will help us reach those goals. Right now, we're seeing slowly but surely investment from our local community, but we've seen more investment happening on the coasts in California and New York. Not enough impact investment, not enough investment from our local governments, and not enough investment from the corporate community here. So a lot of people know that Houston has a large oil and gas community, And so as they're moving towards energy transition and understanding that the future is not going to be oil and gas anymore. In fact, there are more hydro and wind and solar projects in Texas now. That as long as we continue investing in those types of solutions, those solutions will be even more successful than the traditional old ones that have had negative impacts for our environment.
I would like to add by saying that we need to promote all these innovations, and the best way to do it is the entrepreneurs and the partners. Not only do we need to have angel investors or provide money to them, just promoting their products will be enough. And if we can start reaching 25% of the population, then the change can start happening. We have seen this with the toothbrush and other things, but as Charles said, almost 7%, no more than 30% of all the world are aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this should be a priority. If we were aware of this agenda, we would always all work towards that agenda and towards meeting those goals.
Charles, you spoke a bit about this earlier, how there's very low percentage of people who actually know here in Canada and both around the world who actually know about the SDGs. So what would be a way of disseminating the Sustainable Development Goals so that people know more about them and engage with them? And again, this is an open question to all panelists.
I will take a shot at it because I have a few ideas. But I'll put it in context on, let's say, what I'm trying to achieve with the SDGs in the Quebec context. When we talk now about new structural investment, we talk a lot about creating infrastructure. Okay, it's a buzzword that we use a lot to create roads, to build bridges, to build physical infrastructure. I think to bring the SDGs to be more relevant to the general population, there needs to be the creation of an SDG infrastructure, or the way I see it. So I use the word ecosystem. I think it takes together all of the stakeholders involved in the process. And for me, that's still a missing part. So we have strategies to achieve the SDGs, which is often a bit siloed, based on the sectors of activity that you are, whether you're an academic institution, you're a multinational, or you're a government. You might have your own strategy to integrate the goals. But by creating an infrastructure that the citizens can tap into, that the startups, the innovators can tap into, it reinforces the need for collective action. So I'm trying to find a way to explain that we don't, instead of building bridges and building base physical infrastructure, let's invest in creating an SDG infrastructure at scale. Does that resonate with my co-panelists?
Would anyone like to add to what Charles has just said?
Sure, I agree. I think that there, in the same way that we use social networks to connect with each other, there definitely needs to be some more international, multinational infrastructure for us to connect around the SDGs and to learn about what other people are doing so that we can see, you know, could we use some of the ideas there in our different local contexts, and also provide opportunities for funding for different parts of the world for people who are also working in similar areas to us. So as I was talking about Mwinda Technologies earlier, you know, if there are other people who are developing solar projects and there are investors in Houston that are interested in investing in different solar projects around the world, how can we make sure that somebody who's working on a solution in Ghana is going to be able to meet with an investor in Houston and then get resources that can help them grow their business?
Well, I just would like to add that that's why we started with a Sustainable Development Solution Network. Not only do we want to promote what we are doing at the academia level, but also to link this with other areas. We worked with the government, with the private sector, World Impact, which is our counterpart in the private sector, as well as with the UN and different officers from the United Nations, such also different agencies from the United Nations, UNDP, for example. Not only should we have to create the alliances or partners, but in the post-pandemic era, we can start building a better future, because we know that not taking care of the environment led us to be locked down, and we need to recover all these zones that we have lost, as Charles mentioned. Not only do we need to have an infrastructure, but also to discuss education, the way cities are being constructed. Not only do we have to think about SDGs, but start accepting as persons, as individuals, that it's time to change. It's time to sell our vehicles in Mexico City, because sometimes families have 3 or 4 vehicles or cars. So we need to prioritize public transportation, and this way the government with our actions will know where to invest. And also, and if the government does not invest, we need to go to the private sector.
Thank you for those responses. I know we're a bit short on time, so I was wondering, Brock, if you're listening, would you like to take over here, or am I good to go for more questions?
I think just given where we are on the clock, we may wrap it up there, but I appreciate you squeezing those questions in. We will do our best to kind of pose some of the questions we didn't get to today to future presenters and panelists, because these questions of entrepreneurship and the SDGs are central to so many of the topics that we're looking at currently. Thank you to the 3 presenters that we had with us today. We really appreciate the time and the energy that it took to prepare your presentations and to share them with us. So thank you very much. Thank you as well to Nidu, who has done a great job as MC and host for today's session. Thanks for steering us through all of today's activities. And as always, I want to say thank you to the interpreters. This is not an easy task. We all speak too quickly. We all have too many ideas we want to share, but we really appreciate the effort you've made. Every week I've been thanking somebody from the CEC for the various contributions they've made as well. And today I wanted to single out Dominique Croteau and Catherine Holmick, who have been instrumental in preparing and helping to deliver these programs over the last few weeks. So thank you to both of them, who are once again with us today on this call. As you can see on the screen, we are currently halfway through the schedule of the 6 online workshops that are part of this series. So we have just finished Entrepreneurship and the Sustainable Development Goals. Next week, we will proceed with Innovation and Incubation with Green Startups. This is an interesting topic. We've talked a lot about innovation and the notion of incubators and supporting entrepreneurial ventures popped up today several times. Next week, we're going to dive much more deeply into this question. I'll be acting as your MC next week, but amongst our guests are Ryan Kushner from the Third Derivative Incubator in San Francisco. Now, Ryan is the author of a book called Accelerate This. And I'm not sure how that's going to translate into French and Spanish, but in English, it also almost has a bit of a rude connotation to it. So Accelerate This, subtitled A Super Not Boring Guide to Supporting Green Energy Startups. So Ryan will be joining us from San Francisco, and Jeanette Jackson, who runs the Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator based in Vancouver, British Columbia, will also be joining us. We will have some extra special guests that will be a part of the discussion next week, but those are our 2 sort of core and key presenters. So we hope that you'll make the time to join us. As always, these sessions are being recorded. They will be available shortly in English on YouTube and in the very near future in French and Spanish as well. And we will send a note out to participants to let you know when those programs are available. We hope that you can share these ideas. All of our presenters are on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'd be eager to hear if you have ideas or information or questions that you'd like to follow up on. But thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that you've all learned something interesting, and we look forward to seeing you again at this time next week. Take care until then. Bye-bye.